Hello to everybody out there. I am none other than Rabbi Pinchas Landis of Partners Cleveland, and I am here with Rabbi Gamliel Nassan Halevi Spiro of Yeshivas Abbas Torah of Cleveland. Rabbi Spiro, how you doing today on this bright and beautiful, the day we're recording, we don't often say the day we're recording. We're recording this on Sunday, May 9th, Chaf Zayin ER, and it is snowing outside in Cleveland.
And
I'm
it's
just
not
thinking about
just
that.
snowing.
May 9th, Chaf Zayin ER, and it's snowing in Cleveland. Rabbi Spiro, what do you have to say about
snowing,
that?
it's snowing hard right now.
There's snow on the grass. It's crazy. We got to get a picture of this on the Facebook page. It's unbelievable. It's one thing.
Here's my first time of the day that I want to talk about. And we might have mentioned it before, but I think it's important to talk about. And that's about Gefilta fish. That this Shabbos, in the middle of the Suda, Shabbos day, in the middle of the first part of the Suda, my wife is not a traditionalist in general in cooking, but we have Gefilta fish every Suda, come out there in Suda, almost every Suda. And I realized I can't take any more of it. I'm not eating more Gefilta fish. I'm not saying this is a divorce, but it's definitely a long-term separation. I really have had enough Gefilta fish. I'm tired of the way it tastes. I'm tired of its texture. And more than that, it doesn't stand on its own merits. Have you ever said, I could go for a piece of Gefilta fish right now? You've never said that in your life. Have you ever been, there's a place in Brooklyn, Williamsburg called Gottlieb's. Great restaurant. They have great kishka, a lot of great standard, great chopped liver. Those foods, they stand on their own. I love kishka. And no one goes to Gottlieb like, give me a piece of Gefilte fish right now. It doesn't stand on its own.
But and if we want to talk about Jewish fish that stands on its own, herring. Go for herring. I have to admit, I eat herring for lunch many days out of the week.
I'm not a huge herring fan, but it kills Gefilte fish.
It kills Gefilte fish. And I personally eat herring for lunch. It's very healthy. You got your omega-3 fatty acids all over that stuff. It's a small fish, not a big fish. A big fish can have mercury. But you're right. Gefilte fish, I don't know.
And it doesn't, so people will say, well, Chrenes is awesome. And I love Chrenes. I put up there in the pantheon of great inventors. Whoever invented Chrenes is the same guy who invented chocolate and peanut butter together. Agreed. It's a great invention. But first I'm totally happy putting Chrenes on challah. But I'm no more Gefilta fish. And I want to get a movement started about this. I asked my wife if we could stop having it. She said no. So we're talking about Gefilta fish. I said, don't give me, I'm not having Gefilta fish anymore.
Yeah, see, we have in the Landis household, we have certain traditional staples, but I kind of eliminated the fish course altogether a few years ago. I just, for me, it's like we eat so much at the Shabbos meal. It schleps out the meal. We have a little bit of challah and dips and whatever, and then we go into the soup or the cholent or whatever it is to be honest. It's just, I don't.
I can't break that. My wife will still serve Gefilta fish, but I told her, I said, I'm going to buy it from now on. Just have fish. You didn't have any fish on Shabbos. I'll have a whitefish salad. I'll buy herring for myself. I don't care.
Have herring, yeah, exactly.
I've had Gefilta fish is at least a long-term separation with a probable divorce in the works.
And we could really do a whole episode on this, because think about how many Yiddish imamis throughout history are actually traumatized by Gefilta fish. And nowadays we have it easy. You just go, you get the frozen loaf, you put it in the oven, it's done. But it used to be I know my great-grandmother, my great-grandmother, Ole Shalom, they used to do the real deal they do it for Rosh Hashanah and they do it for Pesach, where they get the old wooden bowl, they go down to the fish market and get the carp and and have the whole thing with the bones and the gelatin and that jelly, which just begs the question, what is that jelly? And I remember there were numerous times where we were at their house where they were doing this whole big thing, and you had to call them afterwards and say, did the fish puchki, which meant did it puff up, because that was a family minhag. Everyone had to call and ask if the fish puffed up or not. And I had to admit, and again, they're both in the Olam HaEmes, so they're probably listening to this, and I might, who knows, but I might be in trouble. But
I have a strong feeling they're not, but okay, that's okay.
Right. Well, exactly. It's not their. I think according to Chazal, they can only listen on their yard site, so it's not their yard site today. But according to not the Matzah Ephraim and others. But anyways, but like I had to admit, it wasn't that good. It really wasn't. And they spent so long and worked so hard on it, and I used to have to like pretend like, oh, this is delicious, and it really just wasn't so good. And
My
so,
grandfather would tell us he remembers they kept a carp in the bathtub. Anybody who ever heard when Zadie was young, they
Zadie
know
was
also
young. I was just going to reference when
the
Zadie was
carp
young.
in the
Uncle
bathtub.
Isidore.
My grandfather remembers that. But yeah, I agree. It's a totally overrated food. It's a totally not. At best case scenario, it's decent. You're like, yeah,
I'm
this,
with you.
is anyone? No one's ever been like, this is a great piece of gefilte fish. Everyone's always like, yeah, gefilte fish. It was mildly edible. You know.
Right. And then
Anyway,
then,
good.
and
I want
then
to get off my chest.
yeah, it's important, and we do have to reference again if people are used to jar gefilte fish, which just should be it's a busha chlimachol
Horrible.
b'nei Yisrael to even that stuff. I don't know if it exists anymore, but if it does, terrible.
It
Just
exists. Hard to
terrible.
believe,
Get
but
rid of
you
it.
see, I see it in the stores. Yeah, I'm amazed it
Yeah.
still exists, but
Yeah, it's
it
terrible,
does.
terrible. Anyways, but you know what? I have to say that while gefilte fish is terrible, I love borscht. I don't know about you. I'm a big borscht fan.
I like borscht also. Borscht is a good
Like a
food,
good like my,
especially if
my
you.
wife's grandmother used to make good solid thick borscht soup with the fleischigs. It
Yeah.
was delicious. There's the fleischig borscht, the milchig borscht. But I'm with you, Rabbi Spiro. Let's end it. Let's end it now. Gefilte fish done. Move
100%.
on. Okay.
Gefilte
So
fish. I'm done.
so we're
I'm in
still in
agreement with
our
you.
yeah, so we're still in our pre-Shavuos days, and we're definitely not going to eat gefilte fish on Shavuos. We'll eat cheesecake though, because let's face
I
it,
might be.
cheesecake is not.
I'm not up to the menu's not up to me. Very possible I will be having. I mean, I won't be eating it on
You won't
Shavuot.
eat it though. That's what we say.
Right. Yeah, I won't eat it, but it might be served to me though.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
What are
my
you
wife
gonna
and I were actually speaking a little bit about Shavuos this past week, and I'm trying to avoid. While I love tuna, I'm trying to avoid it because tuna is actually can be terrible for you because of the mercury in it. And someone who I'm close to actually got mercury poisoning because he used to eat tuna like every day for lunch, and he got mercury
Really?
poisoning. And so we usually have tuna for that. I allow one milchig meal on Shavuos. Rabbi, so you're probably smarter than me. You don't allow any milchig meals, or
We
maybe
have
you
one
do. I
milk
don't
meal
know.
on Shavuos.
You allow
We
one,
always have
yeah.
we have one milk meal.
So you don't do like the Ramah with the shtei lechem and the milchigs and
I don't know.
fleischigs?
I was talking to someone this week. Do you know anybody who does that minhag of
I
they
think Rabbi
wash?
Berger. I think my Rabbi Berger does it.
Really?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
wash,
Yeah.
have a challah, eat milchiks, and then wash their
Then,
mouth out,
or you don't have
and
right.
then use
Right.
a second challah for fleischiks to remember the
Right.
shtei
That's like
lechem.
the Ramah.
I was just telling somebody like, I never met anybody who does it. Really,
Yeah, I think Rabbi Berger does. I remember
it's a great
speaking about.
minhag. I don't know
Yeah,
anybody
it's a
who
great
does it.
minute. I was speaking about this custom once with Rabbi Berger, with my Rebbe, about the whole thing about having dairy on Shavuos and my wife's family growing up. And there are many families who do this. It's not, I don't just want to pick on my wife's family because they're easy to pick on, but many families have, I don't even want to call it a minig, have a custom, we'll call it, to have dairy for every meal for Shavuos. And I remember
Really?
speaking to Rabbi Berger about, in general, dairy meals, because I am of the opinion that dairy and Yantiv do not go together, even on Shavuos, except for maybe like the Ramah or whatever. So he said, look, there are people who like to do it, but make sure two things. He said, number one, make sure you have like a chush of a fish or something along with it. Dairy enough is not Yantiv dig. So you have to make sure again, when I wasn't avoiding tuna, like tuna steaks are very chushiv, sea bass, a good salmon, like this is very, if you're into fish, it's very chushiv.
Shark.
What?
Shark.
I thought you said carp, and we're going to
No.
reference back to the Gefilta fish, which we're
Shark.
not talking about.
Great white sharks.
Right. Or if you're getting the food boxes from New York, they give you a nice sushi kit if you like sushi. Some people don't like sushi. Some people we like sushi in our house. But anyways, so Rabbi Berger said, number one, if you're going to have milchigs for a whole meal on Shavuos, you have to have something chashav, a nice fish or something that it's not like lasagna and pizza like a lot of people do. Have something chashuv with it. Number two, he said, as far as the minig of ein simcha el basar v'yayin, and on Yantiv you're supposed to eat meat and wine. He said that goes for each day of Yantiv. So make sure that if you have milchigs, let's say some people like to have it the first night, make sure that for lunch you have fleischigs. He said you need to make sure that you have basar v'yayin on
At least
each
once
day of
per day.
Yantiv. So that pretty much blows out of water anyone has a custom of having all four
So
dairy meals.
I'm going to be chaylik on Rabbi Berger. Not that he's not a Talmud Chacham, and I know people who stopped eating milk meals at all on Shavuos because they went through the sugya. But I want to tell you, the minig of eating milchiks on Shavuos is brought down in the Kadmainim. There are Rishonim who mention it, and there's many
I don't think
Gedolim.
anyone, even Rabbi Berger's, arguing on eating milchigs on Shavuos.
Right, but I'm saying,
It's
but
just
the fact that you
when
have to have a
now-
chashuv, But the fact to say you have to, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a chashva fish, but to say that that's likuva, I don't hear it. It's really a minig Yisrael to eat.
But for a whole meal, Rabbi Spiro, but for a whole meal? You're saying it's
Why
minig Yisrael
not?
to have a
It's
meal?
brought down so many early svarim that people would eat milchiks on Shavuos. The Chazon Ish had a milchik meal on Shavuos.
I
Chaim
say, but
Kanievsky.
maybe I'm wrong. Go back and look at all of the places which mentioned and see if it's talking about meal or just Michael's chalavi, or just eating milchigs. There's a difference.
Chaim Kanievsky, based on the Chazon Ish did this. He eats milchiks the first night of Shavuos.
Okay. So right.
I don't know. It's hard to sometimes you have a mini Yisrael. You have people come along with halachas. You see in Sfarim even, and it's clear the sugya comes out like this. But then if it's a certain minhag, you see, I'm a big fan of the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan usually does not like whenever there's a minhag Yisrael, he always takes great effort to defend it. I don't think he actually mentions. I'll have to look. I don't remember offhand what he holds about milk meals on Shavuos. But anyway.
But be it as it
whatever
may,
you're having,
look,
if you're having
but
cheesecake,
what you can't tell me, Rabbi Spiro, is if Rav Chaim Shlita and the Chazon Ish Zatzal, if they also had a chush of a fish for their dairy.
I don't know.
Could.
I agree. They have. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyhow,
it's hard to know. I know
someone.
someone.
I do agree that milchigs on Shavuos is a stark minig. It's just a question of where it fits into your Shavuos. Sorry, go ahead.
When I was learning Yeridea, we were talking about the sugya of, the Ramaz mashma, you can't eat fish with milk. The excuse me, the mechaber.
Mechaber, right.
Mechaber implies getting fish with milk. Big machlek is was it a mistake in the copying over, or was it? So Rabbi Yosef actually says Sfardim shouldn't. But I remember that my chavrusa told me that the Square Rebbe, by one of his sudas, they fry a fish in butter for him. So interestingly, that was the rye. So yeah. I guess maybe it was, I don't know what type of fish it was. Maybe it was blubber. Do you like blubber?
Blubber, like
you know
Crisco?
What blubber is?
Is it like Crisco?
Blubber is the fat off a whale.
Oh, like that's what it really is.
That's what it really is. So sometimes I go whale hunting.
Yeah.
Off the Pacific Ocean, off the Pacific coast, for blubber.
Blubber.
It's not legal.
It's not legal to whale hunt or to have blubber.
I think it's illegal to eat whale meat because of the reason of whale hunting.
Well, you know that it's interesting that you say that, because one of just talking about paradigm shifts in the world, and I don't know if we've ever referenced this on the podcast, but if not, we'll reference it now, that there's one of these exercises in Doomsdayist, and people are always saying, "Oh, the world's coming to an end, global warming, and we're going to run out of natural resources," or whatever. Like Rabbis, we know you're one of these people. So there's a trick, a little activity that they'll do. They'll show you a news article without a date, and they'll be talking about the great disaster that's going to happen when we run out of our fuel and the natural resource of the fuel that we use, and we're not going to be able to light our candles anymore. We're not going to be able to light our electricity anymore. And it's going to be a problem. And what are we going to do? And then they tell you the date, and the fuel they were talking about was whale oil, right? Because whale oil, and about 100 years ago, was the oil of today, right? So and that's someone was telling me recently that the United Nations, or as I like to call them, the useless nations, said that because we have not done sustainable crop, whatever, that there's only 50 harvests left before they're not going to be able to harvest produce anymore.
Well, sure. Okay. I remember when I was a kid. I grew up as an Eskimo. I remember the harvest for the blubber, the whale oil, and we would skin the what are those? The seals. Very rough stuff.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too into it now because it's a part of my life I don't want to remember.
Exactly. And it's snowing outside. It's going to flash you back to it anyways. But
I might go hunting for seals tonight. We'll see.
So as we're preparing for Shavuos, and we're going to have milchigs and cheesecake and all that good stuff, my wife's already got her fettuccine ready to go, and all her milchig for her one milchig meal that I allow her. So we are still delving into Ruth. I want to correct something that was a little unclear last week. I think it's an important point to hold on to, and maybe we'll delve into it more in a future episode. But we were talking about the murky lineage of Moshiach and how Ruth and the story of Ruth fits into that. And we were talking about how it goes in both directions. It goes leading up to David HaMelech, starting with Lot and his daughters, going on to Yehuda and Tamar, going on to David's coronation and how David fit in up until David, and then weiter we go to of course Ruth and Boaz in there too. And then if we go further, we have David and Bathsheba, we have Shlomo, and I mentioned the whole situation with Jezebel and Atalia, who Jezebel is the evil queen of the north, and Atalia was according to most opinions, her daughter, who was the queen and then the queen regent of the kingdom of Judah, and that we often don't realize that this evil Jezebel, well, if we go with the opinion that she was the mother of Asalia, then that is also the mother of Moshiach, because Asalia wipes out all the other potential heirs to the house of to the throne of David, meaning all the descendants of David through Shlomo, who were the heirs, and the only one who's left is Yehoash, her grandson, who's hid out by Yehoiada and Yehoshaphat and Yehosheva in the base of Mikdash, and that's where Mashiach comes from. So again, just talking about the murky lineage, that we have this piece of Jezebel that comes in also. So just want to clarify that. But we did not get very far into Ruth, as far as psukim go, as far as the verses go, because there's just so much to talk about. But we do plan to continue on with our study together of Ruth. And Rabbi, where are we picking up?
I believe we were holding by the part about Machlon and Kilion. Machlon marries Ruth. Kilion marries Orpah. I actually just saw a medrash that says the exact opposite of that. But it seems Pashup Pshat that Machlon marries Ruth and Kilion marries Orpah. And now, Machlon and Kilion die, and Elimelech is dead already. Mm-hmm. So Ruth is going to go back to, Nami's going to go back to Eretz Yisrael, and Ruth and Orpah, the question was going to be with them. Before we get into that, I want to say an interesting idea that when the Mir Yeshiva was in Europe, not sure what to do. They had a bunch of options. They had a bunch of options with different visas. They had visas maybe to Curacao, which is like a Dutch island, I think, in South America or something. Right, and there were a couple other options to do. And the decision was made. They're going to use, and they're going to go through the Far East, which is what they did. That's where they spent the war year. They spent in Shanghai.
They did have visas through Curacao. If you read the story, there was a whole crop that they had with Curacao. Anyways, maybe we'll go into that another time. But the whole Curacao did play into it.
It rolls. So the yeshiva decided. Rableib Malin, who actually was not the Rosh Yeshiva, but he was like the most chashuv Bach in yeshiva. He made a decision. The ganze yeshiva bleibt zusammen. The whole yeshiva is going to remain together. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, there was one very great person, B'yanim Minsker. Later on, after he was nifter, they wrote up a sefer, Yonis Elam, which literally means a silenced dove. He was killed in the Holocaust. They wrote a sefer of his Torah on Yavamas and Ksubas. The great Talmud Chacham, really on the great losses of the Holocaust. So he had a Swiss passport. I don't remember the whole cheshbon, but he decided he didn't go with yeshiva. And some of his friends said, they were just bemoaning that when there's something called Zchus HaTzibur. There's a certain merit that happens when the tzibur is together. Right, that Klal Yisrael has doesn't mean always every person's protected, but there is a merit of being with the tzibur, and some of his friends, some of the Alter Mirrors, bemoaned the fact that he wasn't with them. They felt that he didn't have this chus tzibur, but he was doing a mitzvah. I mean, it's a tough question. I think his mother was not well, so he was going to go with his mother and try to figure out to get a Swiss passport and go to Switzerland. That was their plan. It never worked out. And Hashem Yinakim Damav, Hashem should avenge his blood. He was killed in the Holocaust. But the idea of the Zchus HaTzibur, and it's interesting because when they go back, when we'll get to in a minute the details, but when they do go back to Eretz Yisrael, the famine has ended. So Nami and Elimelech, who left Eretz Yisrael, they went to Mayav to escape the famine. They actually prolonged the famine for themselves. They were very poor there. And now they come back to Eretz Yisrael. But on the way there, they have what to do with Rus and Arpa. And this is a famous question. And the Mefarshim, if you look at Tzitz Eliezer, has a very nice piece about it. The Madam Zmanim has a nice piece about it. A lot of different Mefarshim discuss it. What were Rus and Arpa? Were they Jews? If they were Jews, then how would Nami allow them not to come back? If they weren't Jews, How is Nami allowed to make a precondition that those who redeem the field has to marry Rus? Rus is a Geiris. Ger Katan Shnela Dami. The Gemara says, Nivamas, a Ger is like a totally newborn person. Why would they be tied in with the field? So the answer given by almost all the Mefarshim is they had a conditional Geiris. The Rambam actually mentions in the Surah Bia that a person in certain times you couldn't convert and join Klal Yisrael. In the days of David, you couldn't join because the army was so powerful, people were scared. In the days of Shlomo, because Klal Yisrael was at such a high level, everybody wanted to become a Jew. But the Rambam asked, what about people who Bezdin had Yaitis? There were Bezdin who converted people. What do you do with those people? Right. The Rambam says they're like in a probationary period, so to speak. You wait. Mm-hmm. So you can say that Rus waited and she came out good and Arba didn't. Another answer is they were Ketanais, they were under the age of 12, whatever shita you want to say.
And by the way, this also plays in, continuing on with the family David Melech with Uriah Chiti, that trying to understand how to say that David Melech Lochote, that he didn't sin in the situation about Shavuos. One of the pieces of that is that Uriah only converted on condition that he could marry a Jewish woman, and that throws him into that same category. I think really? I'm forgetting who says it, but I have my notes on my whole Batsheva, Daven Batsheva shir that I have. But one of the limud schusim, one of the things that we can hang our hat on to help out David Melech over there is that Uriah Chiti was in that same situation as according to the sheet that Rus and Orpah are in, because he only converted to marry a Jew. Therefore, they converted him, so it put him into that probationary period of not being a full-blown Jew, so to speak, or at least being a Jew on condition. So.
It's interesting. Your rabbi, Emmanuel Feldman, a very distinguished American Rav, who was Rav in Atlanta, what was it, 40 years? What was it? I don't know.
Something like that, a long time.
Very long time. So there's always the issue. Geiris, we know, Geirim are a great credit to Klal Yisrael. But people who convert for the wrong reasons and are not really Geirim, or they're Suffolk Geirim, are not a credit to Klal Yisrael. So what to do about it? Rabbi Feldman wanted to make, at one point in the 50s or 60s, wanted to make a temporary hold on Geiris. And he felt that would weed out those who were not serious, but he says he couldn't get any other rabbis to agree with him. But it's a very difficult, Geiris is an extremely complicated topic. And as we said, the Geirim it's interesting, a lot of Torah Shabbal Peh comes through Geirim, particularly Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Meir. Right? Both were, as were Shammai and Avtayan. So it's a major part of our tradition of the oral law is through Geirim.
Unklos Ager.
Yeah. Who?
Unklos Ager.
Unklos Ager. Right.
Because we all know what happened, because he was seemingly the nephew of the Caesar, yeah. And there's a whole Gemara, and it's a question if there's
send people back together, right? Exactly.
Right, and then in the end, he let him go, and he just disowned him, and then he became unkeless.
Right.
There you go. Badam ching. So unkeless. I said, and then after the Caesar disowned him, he became unkeless. Unkeless. Uncle-less. He didn't have an uncle anymore.
I'm not even going to comment on that one.
Okay, right. If you had to explain the pun, it's not worth it. Okay,
man.
But it's.
I wish I could have that 30 seconds back of time.
Maybe we'll have to edit this out for the final cut. But
it's interesting. Also, Ben Bagbag was a ger. Ben Hey was a ger. A lot of people, those interesting names they had. Taisus mentions the Rabbeinu Peter, who was a ger. So really,
one second, time out. One second. But in the Balei Tosfos, according to many historians, whenever they refer to Balei Tosfos as so-and-so Hager, they were Meshumad and came back. It's not that they were Gerim B'chla, because who?
Oh, really?
The question is, I saw that. I just gave a class on the Crusaders last week, and who would be Megayer during the Crusades, which is when the Balei Tosfos were writing. So there's a couple of the Balei Tosfos that are referred to as so and so Hager. So according to a lot of the Unzra historians, they were actually amongst those who were Meshumad, and again forced not by choice, they were forcibly converted, but they came back. Which Rabbeinu Tam. And Rabbeinu Tam was of the opinion you had to take him back, right? That's like many Rambam.
It's actually there's a Ritva who seems to imply that someone who is not Jewish for a couple of generations. What does it mean not Jewish? You're always Jewish, but someone who is converted, they need to go to the mikvah. So it fits in with this idea that there's some degree of a ger, right? In a certain element, they have this. By the way, Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yoshe ber Soloveitchik would tell people, not Bali Tshuva, but people whose families had at one point converted to Christianity, and if they came back, he would tell them they should go to the mikvah and accept upon themselves this element of Geirus, interestingly. So yeah, so Geirus are a credit to Klal Yisrael, but non-Geirim are not. So what do you do? So Arpa, I think, is an underrated personality. Arpa was a great person. I was just reading a Nachas Yosef, on Rus, which is an unbelievable sefer. We have to realize the greatness of Arpa. She was also a daughter or granddaughter of Egline, and she wanted to join Klal Yisrael, and she had the intent, and she wanted to go back with her mother, but in the end, it was too much for her. But it doesn't mean that she was not a great person. And fascinatingly, we know what happened, right? The Gemara says in Saita that night she went and she engaged in what we'll call extreme debauchery. She had relations with 50 men or 100 men. It's brought
Animals,
down.
yeah.
Right. It's a
And we see
terrible thing.
The Goliath was conceived that night.
Right. Reb
It's
Chaim
part of all
Shmulevitz
that.
says, like, he asked, I think it could be mentioned this last year, we'll say it again. It's a beautiful Reb Chaim. He said, he said, Arpa was fundamentally a great person. What made her okay? So she didn't join Klal Yisrael. She believed in Hashem. So he
Hmm.
said she realized it was like popping a balloon. You can't pop a balloon and only get some of the air out. You pop a balloon, all the air goes out. And she realized
And it's the same.
that
By the way,
she
it's the
was
same about Klal Yisrael by the Egel. Like, what's shot that they went from we're up to part of
so high
Shavuos,
to
right? We
so
go from
low.
Shavuos to the Egel in 40 days. It's the same exact site, I believe,
Right. And
right?
she, and
And
she
it's
I think she despaired. She was like, what's the point? And she threw herself into this, which is really, it's something mamish scary, that to think, I think this is and I know she was not Jewish, but she was still an exceedingly good person. So just the idea of, in like Reb Nachman used to say it, like the worst avera is yish. There's no sin as
exactly.
severe as giving up because every other sin you could do tshuva for, right? But once you give up, you're out of the game, and it's really. But actually, I saw another medrash, a fascinating medrash. I didn't see the medrash in the car. I saw it quoted by someone else that really the father of Goliath was Shimshon Gibor, and when he was going out, right, and he was infiltrating, right, so he ended up with Arpa, and he was the father. Fascinating idea. It explains one thing. Shimshon was not a giant, right? He was not a
Right,
giant, but he was an exceedingly super strong person,
right.
right? So I saw it brought
Well,
down in a safer that it explains it.
according to the Pirush on Tanakh from Malcolm Gladwell, it was that he had some sort of pituitary something or other that made him that big. Anyhow, but while we're talking about my misspent
Malcolm
youth,
Gladwell has an afro. That's all I'm going to say.
right, he does, he does. He's a big one. But
Is he
and by
half
the way,
Jewish,
and
Malcolm Gladwell?
I think as Jewish blood, but as I've said many times before, I've read all Malcolm Gladwell's books. I think all of them because I think if you're like into that type of book, you have to read them all. But am very happy to speak about each one and why I hate it. So if anyone would like to talk to me, except for Outliers is good. And I think, but beyond that, I can't stand his books. And even Outliers I have issues with because whatever. Another time we'll have another episode about why I don't like Malcolm Gladwell. But while we're talking about my misspent youth, in my misspent adulthood, there's this lesson that you're saying about how Yush can literally turn a person upside down. I think that it was best expressed by the wonderful theologian of our generation, George Lucas, and the Star Wars. I can't even call it a trilogy anymore because there's so many of them. But you have Anakin Skywalker, who was like the best, like the best of the best of the Jedi's coming up to the Jedi school, and they made him he had to be the one to keep an eye on Palpatine because they knew where he was going. And we see that he's this, but he has this struggle between Palpatine, go back and forth, and then he makes that mistake and accidentally kills Mace Windu, and all of a sudden he's like, okay, I'm Darth Vader. Like
Now
a
you
minute
totally
before
lost
you were
me.
Anakin Skywalker, and now you're Darth Vader. Just like how's that happen?
Wait a
But
minute. Are
that's
you
what happens.
implying that Darth Vader was Luke's father?
Yes, he
Thank
was.
you for ruining it for me, because I just saw Star Wars. and I'm like a half hour into Empire Strikes Back. And thank you
I'm
for
sorry.
ruining the movie
I'm
for me.
Schultex. I'm Schultex. Please forgive me. Again, it's that idea that you have someone who can be great and be working towards greatness, but I to a certain extent, quite often in our attempts to be great at anything, but hopefully in Avodas Hashem in connection to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, a lot of times, and I think this is the beginnings of that, and what we have to look for in ourselves, we can create a pressure cooker for ourselves. In other words, that we want to be a certain way, and we decide that if we are ever not like that, it's just not worth it. Right? It's like Lama Zeh Anochi. What am I here for if I can't be on my straight and narrow? But we have to realize that no, that people are complicated, life is complicated, and what makes it tzaddik? We've said this a million times. We said it once. Sheva yipol tzaddik v'kam. The fact that when you get knocked off the path, you don't say, okay, I got knocked off, I messed up, I'm done, like Anakin / Darth said, like Lahavdil, well, maybe not Lahavdil, Orpah said, like Lahavdil, Klal Yisrael after at the time of Chet Egel said. It's that we put ourselves on the straight and narrow, and sometimes we think that it was such rigidity, and rigidity is important, and habitual behavior is important in growth. I'm not knocking it. I'm a very habitual person. But if I try, if I ever mess up and don't do what I set forth for myself, I say, okay, so I messed up today, I got tomorrow. And I believe this is my favorite poem of all time, right? It's one of the shortest poems, but it is the
You have a
I
favorite
do,
poem?
Rabbi
That's
Spiro. I
amazing.
do have a favorite poem, and I'm gonna say it to you now because it is the best poem of all time. And as soon as I know it, I think you're gonna know who the Mechaber is. Ha'aver ayin, ha'asid adayin, ha'hove keherif ayin, daiga minayin. You know that poem?
Mordechai Ben
No,
David
no,
wrote it.
no. Come on. It was the Ibn Ezra,
I'm
right?
joking. Mordechai
Oh,
Ben
he might
David
have
sang
sang it,
it.
right? The Ibn Ezra wrote it. Avram Ibn Ezra wrote it, who had a terribly tumultuous life. Terribly tumultuous life. And I think, but that, we'll translate it into English here, it's ha'aver ayin, the past is gone, ha'asid adayin, the future is, ha'asid adayin, the future is not yet here yet, ha'hova keref ayin, the present is like the blink of an eye, daiga minayim, why would you worry? The idea is that really life is just a fleeting moment. Why worry about how you might have screwed up in the past? Why focus so much on the future? Yeah. Anyhow, long story short, I think that the important lesson over here is that look, rigidity is important. Growth and setting yourself on a path of growth and success is important. But as you said so beautifully, Rabbi Spiro, Yush has no place in the Jewish people,
Right.
and everyone's gonna mess up, except for Rabbi Spiro. I mess up all the time, right? My wife never messes up, but I mess up all the time. And we have to know that when we mess up, we can't pull an Orpah. That should actually be a Jewish phrase. Like, don't pull an Orpah,
Don't give
because,
up.
like you said, Orpah, like she was almost up there. She
It's
almost entered the
interesting. She
family.
could
Now,
have.
you
She
know,
could. First of all, the fact that she married Kilyon, the fact that she married a Jew, being from Moab, in itself was unique. And had
right?
she gone into Eretz Yisrael, I'm not saying. I don't think she was the same level of extraordinary human being that Rus was, but she still could have been a tremendously great person with a tremendously great future. And in the end, she's not.
So I,
So
so I can't remember I saw
it's
it.
tragic.
But so I can't remember I saw it, but I believe along those lines that there's one of the Meforshim that does say that until that point they were the same.
Oh, really?
In other words, the trajectory of Rus and Orpah up until that point of where Rus goes one way and Orpah goes the other, they were the same, with the same potential, and had reached the same heights, and the same background, and yeah, I think she, like you said, she's one of the great tragic figures of the Jewish people of Jewish history.
It's interesting. The Mefarshim are aimed on the fact it says in the pasuk, "Vatishak Arpa l'chamaseh." Arpa kissed her mother-in-law and she left. But Rus davkaba, right? Meaning, so they speak about the idea that even though obviously kissing is a form of connection, but she wasn't able to throw herself in 100%. And you see, Rus sets herself up for a life of extreme difficulty. Coming back to Eretz Yisrael, everything is hard for her. She has no money, right? No money. They have to live through the mitzvah of Peah, right? It's fascinating. It says, some of the Mefarshim ask, really, Meir Bloch asked this question, and more recently others asked the question, Elimelech, was he an uncle or was he a brother-in-law? A brother, excuse me, of Boaz and and of Toiv and of Salmon, whatever he was to them, either brother-in-law, brother or uncle, they're all very rich. Boaz is a very, very wealthy man. Right? So imagine your brother is brother-in-law is one of the richest people in Klal Yisrael, and you have to go out to the field late at night, right? Not late at night, at the end of the harvest, and go on your knees literally and gather up the food. Why? He could have given her money. They were very rich. So Alvin Rebbe said, it's not. Of course, he would have offered to give it. Of course, he did offer to give it, but Rus did not want to take Loli de Manas Bas of Adam, no gifts. And I saw it brought down and said, well, but what do you mean? She took Peah. Peah is not a gift. Peah is something that every Jew is mechuyev to give. And that's not called a gift from another human being. That's something that belongs to Aniyah. Right? Actually, it's a fact. You learn this sugya, it's like in Parrot. When does the food belong to the ani? When it falls off the cluster. I happen to hate that word, but we use it. The cluster when it hits the ground. But everyone agrees at a certain point it mamish belongs to the ani. So that's not called taking charity, right? It's a very interesting way of looking at it. But they didn't want to take any matanos. But I want to say an interesting ha'ara also from Nachas Yosef. He says. You look at the Gemara of Abbas. The Gemara of Abbas are a contrast between Rus and Eov, right? A little bit, both part of Ksuvim, right? If there's something fascinating, then so the Nachas does contrast Rus herself. Nami with Eov. What does Nami say? She gets back to the land, and the years have been very hard on her. Right? People call her, oh, there's Azais Nami. No, she says, don't call me Nami. Call me the one whose life has been made bitter. Hashem made my life bitter. I left full, I'm coming back empty. Right? Hashem returned me with nothing. So the Nachas Yosef says you see the difference between Nami and Eov. What does Eov do? The whole Sefer Eov is about Eov arguing with his friends and trying to say, what are Hashem's motives? We know, just to touch upon, it's been a very hard week for Klal Yisrael, I think for everybody. And I think that's a good thing because of what happened in Meron. But I think, I don't know if it's the right answer to right away be Nevi'im and say, this is why it happened, that's why it happened. Right? Just to know that Hashem give us a punishment, yes. Hashem took karbonos, no doubt. We don't know why it happened. So Nami's not trying to say this is why we were punished by Hashem. It's unknown. But one thing is for sure, we were punished by Hashem, and Eov spends all his time really Perek Gimel through Perek, I think Mem Aleph or Mem Beis, and say for Eov, a lot of very intense discussion with Eliphaz and Eliphaz, Elihu, I forgot the other name. And trying to determine why did Hashem do this? Does Hashem care? Is there Hashgacha Pratis? All these different discussions which really lead nowhere. And I saw Rabbi Eisman gives a beautiful pshat in his Perush on Eov. He said, what if his friends which would have comforted him? Right? And we know, the Gemara says, what's the schar of going to a base Avel? Shtika, silence, just the idea of not saying anything. And looking for answers is not always our responsibility. Sometimes it's better just to absorb the terrible information and just to let it feel the effect. That itself could be a positive thing. And I think beautifully, Baruch Hashem, we see, I think Klal Yisrael is so beautiful, it's like you really feel it. Like in Eretz Yisrael, B'chlal, I spoke to my Chavus was there, and they told me, you mamish feel it in the air. And even in, I think in Shul, you feel it. And that shows something great about us.
Yeah. By the way, I think it's interesting that quite possibly the most quoted pasuk from Eov, because it's part of the Tziduk Aden, and people are always taking it out of context, is Hashem Nasam Hashem Nakach Yishem Hashem Mavarach. Yishem Hashem Mavarach. which a lot of people think who don't learn Eov that is the conclusion of Eov, and they don't realize that's the Hakdama of
Right.
Eov, right? That was where Eov started, and I think it's very along the lines of what you're saying. That's very telling that that's sort of like the lesson that's come of the Sefer is not after the process, which in the end they finally come to. Okay, we don't know the ways of Hashem. They finally get there in the end, sort of. But the intro is it's almost like we're saying this is where Eov should have stopped. Hashem
Right.
Nasan, Hashem Lakach, Yehi Shem, Hashem Evrach, right?
And,
And
right.
that because that's as far as we can get into the sugya.
And we see
So
the great example of Aaron Akain. Vayidaim
right,
Aaron. Aaron was silent. The idea, the Maila of silence. Very hard for us to be quiet. And I always tell my Bachrim, whenever you go to a Shiva house, don't say anything unless the guy says something to you. And even then, try to just ask about the family. Don't ask how long. Did they try this treatment? Hey, what difference could it possibly make at this point? Trust me, I've heard crazy things said at Shiva houses. Someone was like, I heard someone say like, "Did you try this doctor?" I was like, it could not make any less of a difference at this point, right? They're right.
right,
Like, yeah, when the person's alive, you have to make all hishtadlis, obviously. But yeah, it's,
yeah. And I think it's an interesting comparison with Rusniev. I never heard that before.
yeah,
It's a beautiful idea. And I'll throw out the question as we're making our way through Rus here because I think it's both a simple question and a complex question. But why is it that this is the Megillah of Shavuos?
all right.
Along the lines
Great
of everything we've been
question.
saying. Famous question and many answers given. But
All right.
what's your favorite answer, Rabbi
I'll tell
Spiro?
you my favorite answer is that someone like Rus, who was a nobody, and I say nobody, meaning not only did she have no yichus, she had bad yichus, we'll call it, right?
Right.
And that someone like that, through sincerity and through persistence and through chesed in particular, right? That's what the Yaakov Shmoni says. It teaches the midah of chesed. That through that, she was able to become to the highest level of Ima Shamalchas, we call her, right? The mother of kinghood. She saw David HaMelech, who was her great grandson, be coronated. She saw Shlomo HaMelech. The Gemara says in Bava Basra. She must have been a very, very old woman by that point, extremely old.
Yeah, because she's the great great grandmother of
Right. So
Shlomo.
she must have been
Right.
extraordinarily old at that point. And
Right.
to see someone like that, like I said, with now like negative yichas coming in and
Hmm.
showing that Torah is any person can grab Torah. Any person can have that shaykhs to the Rebbeinu Shalom and grab Torah is to me a very inspiring message. One more message, I guess, hard to pick just one, is that, and we'll see in the end. And I don't want to ruin it for the people who don't know, but we know how it ends, right? That when it goes to the yichus, right? By Hailed is Ovid, Hailed is Yishai Hailed is David. That things turn out, if a person is sincere in his relationship with Hashem, things turn out well. You might not always see it. It's not a microwave. You're not going to see it in 2 minutes. It's going to take even dozens of years.
Or even an Instapot,
Even a what?
or not even an
What's
Instapot.
Instapod?
Oh, okay. We'll talk about it later, Rice Spiro. We just got one. They're pretty cool.
I gotta hear about that.
Like pressure cooker,
Oh,
kind of like a
really?
pressure
I
cooker.
love. I always
So
love
yeah.
that stuff. Air fryers, pressure cookers. I never get them. I'm afraid I'm not gonna know how to use them.
We have them all. I'll give them two because we usually use them for a few times and
Yeah.
never use them again.
Okay.
So I have like an air fryer I can give you.
So, but the idea of that idea of that at the end, how everything works out so well. And it even says in Mefarshim say,
Beautiful.
remember, Boaz and Rus were married for one day. And Mefarshim say,
Exactly. He died later that day.
people
Yeah.
were like, for sure, wagging their tongues the next day. Say, oh, look at this. You see, Taiv was right and Boaz was wrong. And look, Hashem punished him. He struck him down. Like, I'm sure there was a lot. And the idea of seeing the big picture in Avodas Hashem is also, like they said, this Rus is just so many great messages.
So many
It's hard
angles.
to get it
Yeah.
down to just
But
one.
I love that. And I would sum up that idea that you just said as the way I often say it is that Yiddishkeit is a meritocracy, not an
Right.
aristocracy. And you see that through Rus, we mentioned Shema V'Atalia, and we mentioned Rebbe Kiva, we mentioned Rebbe Ner, and on through many great Talmidei Chachamim and into modern times. I mean, I think of my friend. I have a friend who's a Rosh Kollel in a certain city who's a a public school kid who just basically became the Talmud Muvak of Rav Aaron Schechter and is a big Rosh Kollel now. And we are a meritocracy. That's the bottom line. And yes, we have certain. Seeing as you are a Levi, we do have certain aristocratic things, but in general, we're a meritocracy.
Right,
and
that's what it says. The Mishnah says in Avos, right? Keser Kahuna, yes, that's only for some people. Keser Malchus, that's really only for a few people. But the Keser Torah is for everybody. And that's why we mentioned last week that story on Yom Kippur. Did we say this last week? When they were accompanying the Kohen Gadol home. This is a period when the Kohanim Gedolim during Bai Sheni were not particularly distinguished people. Some were out and out stukim, and some were not stukim, but they were not distinguished. They just were rich, and they bought the position. And all of a sudden, they saw Shemai and Avtalion walking, and like instinctively, they all went over to Shemai and Avtalion, right? Even Shemai and Avtalion, who were they? They were like the Kohen Gadol made a line like, "You guys are from Sancheriv." I don't know if that meant literally he knew they were from them, or he was just saying. That's probably who you're from, whatever it was, a very not complimentary line. But Klal Yisrael realized that who is the true aristocracy? Shemai and Avtalion are the aristocracy in Klal Yisrael. Right?
Beautiful.
Two Gerim. So it's such an inspiring message. It shows that anybody can accomplish, anybody can become. It's really out there, and everyone. And Baruch Hashem, Klal Yisrael is great. I think besides emphasizing how great we could be, which will happen, Moshiach will come. We also should emphasize how great we are already. I think it's also
100%. Yeah, and look, as this is our similar to the idea of going into Shavuos. It's almost like a new year. Right, we have the whole idea of Tichel Shana V'Kil Esau from this past week. We read Bechukosai before Shavuos to get it out of the way before a new year of Kabbalas Torah, and we hope to have an amazing year ahead of us with helping with the Harbatzas Torah through this podcast and through other things we're doing. And we like to wish everyone out there a beautiful Shavuos, a meaningful Kabbalas Torah. This is the time. In other words, it's the whole idea of when we talk about the Hashpos Kedusha, the flows of holiness in the world. Yes, Kabbalas Torah you can do 365 or 354 if you're on the Jewish calendar, or 384 if it's a leap year, whatever it is. You can always be involved in Kabbalas Torah, but it's a question of wholesale versus retail. And this time of year, it's wholesale to just get in there and so to speak, chaperein and grab onto it and enjoy it and grow from it and set big goals for the coming year. No daigas, but big goals. No yiyush, and we'll make an amazing year of growth of Torah.
Amen. I just want to say, end off with one line. I saw a beautiful medrash. Everyone knows the Mishnah in Psachim. Everyone is aware of the Chayev Ad Miras Aspa Kilu Yatzim in Mitzrayim. Every Jew is obligated to try to portray themselves as if they left Mitzrayim. But the medrash, not a Mishnah, but a medrash says Chayev Ad Miras Atzmo Kilu Hu Oimed Bahar Sinai. And on Shavuos, a person's mechuyev to see yourself like you're standing on Har Sinai. So it's
and it's one of the Shishis Zichronos, one of the 6 things we're supposed to remember every day. And beautiful.
So
let's do it. Let's do it, Shiro. Okay, we'd like to wish everyone a beautiful week, a beautiful Shavuos, and we will look forward to more great Rabbis podcasts after Shavuos. Everyone have a great week, and we'll talk to you next time.